You are tuned to 94.1 KPFA in Berkeley, 89.3 KPFB in Berkeley, 88.1 KFCF in Fresno, and 97.5 K248BR in Santa Cruz, online at kpfa.org. Stay tuned. It's 2 p.m. for more special Fund Drive programming.
The following program is pre-recorded.
KPFA's fundraiser. Fund Drive, Dreiser, Razor, Druser. You know what I mean. We are looking for your financial support. And we turn to you a couple of times a year because it's better than the alternative. The alternative is doing what every other station does, which is turning to the commercial, to the capitalist method of making money, selling you something, treating you as a customer, as a source of someone that can be profited from, someone that can be sold something to. And that's not what KPFA or any of the Pacific stations has ever been about. We were founded on the principle that listeners are intelligent, and that intelligent listeners deserve real information, unbought, unsold, just information from all sorts. And then that they and their intelligence will be able to decide for themselves how they wish to perform as citizens. It is as a citizen that the station serves you. How to vote, how to decide what's right, how to join with others of your ilk to magnify your power, how to know your power, how to recognize your power, to be empowered with the information and the connections that these 59,000 watts of power create among all of us that are privileged to listen to it, hear it, have it. And now all over the planet at kpfa.org. And that's the good news. The bad news is that we, and therefore, are always struggling financially, but we've dealt with that. For 70 years now, we know this one. It's not easy. It's never easy, but it's possible. And that's really all we're asking for. Possibility. The possibility of continued health. So, in that light, as an offer to you and to remind you of what it's all about and why we're here, and also where we're going, and it's so fascinating, this information that I'm about to present to you. It's ancient, and it's the future, and it's terrible, and it's clear. The clarity of it is wonderful. I speak of Silvia Federici, and we were blessed to have her visiting the Bay Area from her home in Italy just 2 months ago, and she did a KPFA event. I also was very privileged to interview her here on this program, and we're going to be bringing you the event that she appeared at, the KPFA event, and we're also going to be offering you a copy of her latest book. And so let's just go straight into it. What you're going to hear first is another dear friend and colleague, Sasha Lilly, who was the host of the evening where Sylvia spoke at St. John's Presbyterian Church in December. And she does a brilliant introduction, so I don't need to. Here she is.
It is a rare treat to spend the evening with the brilliant and inspiring Silvia Federici, a person of enormous intellectual and political generosity and steadfast commitment to the struggle against capitalism and empire. It's no exaggeration to say that she's one of the most important thinkers on the left, so we're incredibly lucky to have her here in Berkeley on this chilly December night. Our world is being shaken by protests over people's basic ability to feed, clothe, house, and care for themselves and each other. In other words, to reproduce the conditions of life. Although the mainstream media has been fixated on the inward-looking spectacle in Washington, D.C., demonstrations have been flaring up in the Middle East and Latin America, from Lebanon to Chile to Iraq and Colombia, Today in France, the trade unions joined with anti-austerity yellow vesters for a general strike against Macron's plan to gut pensions. Unlike the last round of anti-austerity protests, these don't come in the depths of a historic global economic crisis, but under, apparently, anyway, more rosy conditions. How should we make sense of the struggles over the reproduction of basic conditions of life? And how should we understand them within the long history of dispossession and resistance since the dawn of capitalism? No thinker has engaged as fruitfully with these questions as Silvia Federici, whose breadth of vision spans centuries, illuminating the intricacies of capital accumulation in the present. Few shed as much light on the ways that capitalism reshapes labor, both waged and unwaged, particularly dispossesses groups like women, and sets us against each other. Her many books include Witches, Witch Hunting and Women, Revolution at Point Zero, Beyond the Peripheries of the Skin, and Re-Enchanting the World, as well as her groundbreaking work, Caliban and the Witch. Silvia was a co-founder in the 1970s of the International Feminist Collective, which launched the Wages for Housework campaign globally. Last year, she co-edited a collection of writings from the New York Wages for Housework campaign, which you might want to check out. She's also one of the co-founders of the Committee for Academic Freedom in Africa. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Silvia Federici.
So I'm here tonight to present one of my last books that PM Press has published, which is called Witches, Witch Hunting, and Women. But I want to talk more generally about the question of witch hunting and what does it mean today. Witch hunting, it's an expression, it's a word that has been much misused of late. And it's terrible because behind it there is a whole history that has been increasingly forgotten and that I think we need to recuperate because it's a history that has a lot of implication also for the present, especially for the life of women. Now, I've been dealing now with the issue of witch hunting for many years. Basically, I started in the mid-70s. And I think I will begin by, speaking a bit about how I became interested in it. At that time, some of you who are of my age will remember a pamphlet came out. This was one of the high moments of the feminist movement. A pamphlet by Barbara Ehrenreich and Deirdre English, entitled Nurses, Midwives, and Healers. And that pamphlet talked about witch hunts, and he said, well, the witch hunts in Europe took place in the 16th century, and for the first time, I heard of a connection between the witch hunts and the rise of capitalism. By that time, witches was a concept that was very familiar to me because the word strega, witch, in Italian, I'm originally from Italy, was always used to design a bad woman. If you were a bad woman or if you were poorly dressed, or if you were, my mother, for example, would see me going out in the morning, go to school, and I didn't comb myself, and she would say, you look like a witch. And so, but I believed that these were more legendary figures. I believed that this was a kind of folklore used, to discipline women. And, that pamphlet made me realize that this was a true story, and also by the chronology, that this was a story that obviously was connected with the rise of capitalism. because the chronology of the witch hunt, as specified in that pamphlet, connected it with the great process of enclosure, the mass expulsion of the peasantry from the land in Europe, with the conquest of what is today called America Latina, and with the beginning of the slave trade and the plantation economy in the south of the United States and the Caribbean. So this was really let's call it an illumination, because I realized that this was a whole part of history that had been obviously completely ignored, by, socialist thinkers, Marx, etc. Already in the feminist movement, I gone through the experience, of looking for, an understanding of the specific form of discrimination and exploitation that women have suffered in capitalist society, turning to Marxist work for that and discovering that there was very little relating to the experience of women in that work. And the witch hunt convinced me, okay, I now have to learn, this history has to be understood. And I embarked into the project of, writing at that time what I saw as the forgotten part of primitive accumulation, which is the work that eventually led to Caliban and the Witch. And for those of you who have read the book, you know that much of what I've written in the book is, in conjunction, is to explain that the witch hunts were a fundamental aspect of the process that laid the material, social, political condition for the rise of a capitalist economy, and in particular for the development of a sexual division of labor, of new gender relation based on a hierarchy between waged and unwaged workers, on women's dependence on men, etc., etc. And tonight maybe I'll go back to some of those themes. And of course the witch hunt was very instrumental, in weakening the resistance, of a whole, what I call proletariat, of a whole population to the advance of capitalist relation in Europe. And of course, the witch hunts were also exported by missionary and conquistadores to America Latina, and particularly Colombia, Brazil, the area of the Andes, and was used as a tool, as a strategy against the struggle of people in the slave plantation to free themselves. So it was often used to accuse particularly the use of rituals and particular forms of protest by slaves, and they were accused of being demonic. So this has been a very important aspect for me for the formation of modern capitalist society. But I decided to return to it in more recent years. I never actually stopped reading, and because there's something so extraordinary about that persecution. I don't know who else in history has been accused of being a servant of the devil, of being the enemy of humanity, not of having killed, not of having done, but literally of being thoroughly evil, so completely evil as to actually being a servant of the devil. Right? And of course, that type of accusation, it's really rooted in some Christian theology, because the division between good and evil is very much at the root of at least certain interpretation of Christian theology.
You're listening to Silvia Federici speaking in December at a KPFA event at St. John's Presbyterian Church. And for the entirety of her remarks, we would be delighted to offer you a CD of the evening for your $75 donation to KPFA. If you were there at the time, you will probably want to hear it again, because it's been a while, and so many things keep dropping into our consciousness, don't they? Sort of muddying the waters to get the clarity that Silvia Federici is famous for, literally, on these topics. $75 will get you the CD, which is $5 a month. She was in town to celebrate the publication of a new book, Witches, Witch Hunting, and Women. And we are also offering you that book for your $80 donation to KPFA, or $8 a month, when you call 1-800-439-5732, 1-800-439-KPFA, and online at kpfa.org. And she mentioned that she had written a book and then had let the topic go, but it wouldn't let her go. And that book, the first book, was Caliban and the Witch, Women, the Body, and Primitive Accumulation. And we're offering you a copy of that book as well for your $150 donation to KPFA, or $15 a book a month. And of course, we can do all kinds of combinations of the CD and one of the book, or both the books and the CD, and blah, blah, blah. Whatever you think would be best, would best serve you. At 1-800-439-5732, 1-800-439-KPFA, and online at kpfa.org. Let's get back to Silvia Federici.
Now, I've come back to the witch hunts because more and more, as I was finishing to work on Caliban and the Witch, I began to realize, to my horror and surprise, that the witch hunts were never finished, and that in fact, in more and more parts of the world, new charges of witchcraft were being waged against women. And in fact, in the years that followed, the publication of Caliban and the Witch was in 2004. Those accusations and the persecution of women have only continued to grow. And now statistics say that there are thousands and thousands of women who have been killed on the charge of witchcraft in different parts of Africa, India, Papua New Guinea, East Timor, and it's really been spreading, and it's been spreading also, beginning to spread in Latin America, though it has not taken, the murderous forms that it has taken in other parts of the world. And so naturally, I was drawn to try to understand if, again, there was a connection between this return of this persecution that I believed, was finished, had been terminated, at least in the 18th century. If there was a connection with the process of globalization, the new forms of capitalist economization, this big expansion of capitalist relation across the world. And this is what I am discussing in the second part of the book. So the book is really divided in two parts. In the first one, I go back again to look at the past, and particularly with an essay that focuses more directly on the relation between witch hunting and enclosures. Enclosures, for those of you maybe are not familiar with medieval English history, it's the process that it was is a very specific term. Is the process by which the landlords, roughly speaking, at the end of the 16th century, began to expel, the peasantry the peasants, they were, living off their land, on their land, and they were using some of the lands they had given them in exchange for labor services, right? And so they would enclose the land, fence them off, that they were given to the peasantry to chase them off, to chase them away, and to turn the land that they had used for their subsistence into land that would be marketed. It's really the beginning of capitalism, right? The two conditions that a capitalist society needs. A population that is propertyless and therefore has to depend on whatever work is given to them, and of course depend on very miserable wages as the beginning of a wage system. And on the other, land that is not being used and can be put on the market, can be commercialized, can be sold, can become actually an instrument of exploitation of people. Like this, at least in Europe. So the enclosure is actually the fencing off and the chasing of people. And I'm looking in one of these essays, what is the connection? Because there is clearly a connection between this major attack and the turning of masses of people into a landless population and the witch hunt. It's one of the connection between this persecution and the rise of a capitalist society. First of all, the women who were accused were usually older women and poor women, and the whole context of the charges is a context, is a place, is a space where people have nothing, particularly this population of older women who are going around, many of them begging their neighbor for a little bit of milk, for a little bit of wine, butter, right? And for a bit of sociality. Many were accused, they would show up at marriages uninvited. And so there is a whole picture there that clearly connects the context of witch hunt, right, to a context of a society that has gone through major processes of dispossession. And also the explanation that is given for why these women, are causing all these damages, the damages imputed to them, raising storms and destroying the crops of their better off neighbor. So they are accused of actually having created the storms, or maiming the animal. The animals die, and of course there is the bad woman who has been indicted, or causing people to die, right? And it's the jealousy. These women are eaten up by this jealousy. So all this, right, speaks of a space, of a social space that is ridden, obviously, by tremendous division, right? And by the fear of those who are better off, that the poor are, engaged in want to revenge against them. And this is also the period of the mass revolts, mass protest, mass revolt against enclosure. So it's a period of struggle, and there is no question that the witch hunts was a major element in the weakening of the struggle, and also in the dividing of women from men, because the witch hunt serves to portray an image of the woman who is diabolical, and an image that affects all women, because the books, the demonologies that are written, the treatises that are written in this period to describe what is witchcraft, how witches have to be treated, basically argues. This book were arguing that women are more easily seduced by the devil because they are ontologically inferior They have no reason. They have no control over their passions, etc., etc. So so this is what I look at in the first part of the book. I go back to the period, and I was particularly interested on the question of enclosure, because I think that today many of the witch hunts that are taking place are also connected with land dispossession. There is a theme of land that runs through many of the cases of women who have been charged and murdered, whether it is in Africa or in India, and I'll come back to it later. So I was very particularly interested in this connection. But of course, the witch hunts were also the product of the enclosure, another kind of enclosure that is really has been completely ignored in the Marxian and Marxist, histories, which is the enclosure of the body. One of my arguments is that fences have been put not only around the common lands, not only around the commons and the land that people had in use, fences have been put also around the bodies in so many ways. The bodies in the sense, particularly women's body, in the sense that, with the witch hunts and the rise of capitalism, you have a drive by the state to possess, to control the body of women and to put them at the service of the reproduction of the workforce, the reproduction of people's capacity to work. So to control procreation. So the demographic movements become extremely important. In fact, demography really is born as a science with the capitalist society. How many people are dying? How many people are born? How many people are marrying? And this, my theory, the theory I've presented is that, has to do with the fact that capitalism is the first system in history who makes of human labor the substance of wealth. Previous system connected wealth to possession of land, possession of control over large territories. Capitalism places wealth in terms of people's labor. And it's not how much land that you possess, is how many workers you can exploit. And this, I think, has affected also, the capitalist class relationship to women, to procreation, the women's body, marriage, the question of democracy, demography, and, because immediately the procreation becomes a moment, an aspect of the process of the reproduction of the workforce, and becomes extremely important as an activity to be controlled.
Silvia Federici, as someone says about her book that she's talking about on this lecture that she gave in December for KPFA, Witches, Witch Hunting, and Women. One reviewer said, for a book so short, this sure packs a lot of power into it. This is a book you can't unread. Whether it'll affect your life or not depends on you, but it definitely leaves an impact. Silvia Federici, the event is yours with a $75 donation to KPFA. That's $5 a month. It's on CD. The book, Witches, Witch Hunting, and Women, is yours for an $80 donation to KPFA, or $8 a month. And the original book, the earlier book, one of her most famous books, and a longer book, Caliban and the Witch, Women, the Body, and Primitive Accumulation, is yours for a $150 donation to KPFA, or $15 a month. The phone number here is 1-800-439-5732, 1-800-439-KPFA, and online at kpfa.org. And I forgot to mention earlier that we have a challenge from a listener, a woman, Susan, in Santa Clara, and she is willing to put up $600 to convince more of you to devote some of your cash to KPFA with your calls, your donations, your subscriptions, your calls at one or online as well at kpfa.org. That's 1-800-439-5732 and online at kpfa.org. So for $600, anything that you pledge right now is doubled by the wonderful Susan in Santa Clara. Many, many thanks to her. And appropriately enough for this woman speaking on this topic. Well, this is our common history. And as one reader said, this book blew my mind and set me on a path for the research I intend to do with my next 3 university years. There's so much I don't know about my own history. It isn't very often that a book inspires frantic questions. And especially what capitalism has against women is their ability to commune, to be in groups, to work in groups together, to cooperate. This was one of the most dangerous things for capitalism, which is all about separating. This is another one of those universal themes, isn't it? Just as yesterday with Ram Dass, the separation versus a connection. And let's see, women are seen as agents of resistance to ending communal ways of life today. In Nepal, in Mozambique, in Ghana. She's lived and worked in Africa. She is a scholar, teacher, and activist from the radical autonomist, feminist, Marxist tradition. She's a professor emerita and teaching fellow at Hofstra University. She was a social science professor there. She worked as a teacher in Nigeria for many years, is also the co-founder of the Committee for Academic Freedom in Africa. And all of this is to point up what she says in her book. Violence against women is a key element in this new global war, not only because of the horror it evokes or the messages it sends of violence and death and destruction, but because of what women represent in their capacity to keep their communities together, and equally important, to defend non-commercial conceptions of security and wealth. Just like KPFA. A very understandable connection, which is no doubt why this event was so well attended. And events that she presents in Europe are standing room only. And even here, when I was at Moe's looking for some others of her books, they said that they were going off the shelves here. They recognized exactly what a power this woman and her thinking and her clarity represent. We're asking you to support the radio station and to do what you can to expand your own consciousness about the centrality of violence against women in this society and the world economy. And therefore, as one of the readers says, she sends out a call to feminists wherever they are to break their silence on this global phenomena. And while she paints a bleak picture, she also includes the heroic ways that women are resisting and how, centering on women reclaiming the power of their female networks. And this reader says, i.e., their covens, reclaiming, which in fact is the name of the organization co-founded by Starhawk. Reclaiming so much that we have been socialized to hate about ourselves as we have been, quote, integrated, unquote, into capitalism. And the reader concludes by saying, I have never been more proud to be a witch. 1-800-439-5732 to get the benefit of this woman's thinking and speaking from the event. $75 or $5 a month. It's on CD for reading her latest book of Witches, Witch Hunting, and Women. That's yours with $80 donation to KPFA or $8 a month. Her earlier book, upon which this book really expounds, Caliban and the Witch: Women, the Body, and Primitive Accumulation. That's a $150 donation to KPFA or $15 a month. 1-800-439-5732. 1-800-439-KPFA. And don't forget the $600 match that we have from Susan in Santa Clara. If you donate $25 right now, it's worth $50 to us. If you always wish that you could give KPFA double what you really can afford, here is your opportunity to do just that. 1-800-439-5732. If you'd like the CD of the event and both of Sylvia's books, that is yours for a $250 donation to KPFA. 1-800-439-5732. 1-800-439-KPFA and online at kpfa.org. Let's go back to hear some more from Sylvia Federici.
The witch hunt clearly is, instrumental to that process. Similarly, the control of a woman's sexuality, because sexuality is deeply involved in the question of procreation. And also in the discipline of labor. You have to discipline sexuality to have a disciplined workforce. Sexuality involves the whole, what we call waste of energy or use of energy. That has to be controlled really very minutely, because that energy has to be used productively, so has to be channeled in a proper way. So that's why I speak of enclosure of the body. There's an enclosure of land, but there's also an enclosure in the body as an enclosure of social relation. Capitalism, from the very beginning, is a major, major attack on sociality. Every form of collective activity, every form of collective work, first of all, collective work, the destruction of the common, individualizes work relation, and then you have the attack on collective games, festival, even pilgrimages. Even pilgrimages become suspicious. Pilgrimages were moments of great festivity. People went together to the shrine of a saint and together spent a talk and the Canterbury Tales. Even that becomes a target. So there is a process. So enclosure has been one that has really interested me and has been a metaphor for many of the development that capitalism has brought on the world scene. And in the first part, I also have a section that I think many women have really responded to, on the changes in the meaning of the word gossip, because I didn't know but realized that in the very time period in which the witch hunts unfolded, which was more than 2 centuries, we have a transformation in the meaning of gossip, which used to mean a good friend, right? You say, I'm going out with my gossip. But within 2 centuries, the meaning has changed completely. And gossip means this kind of, terrible type of talk, idle talk at best, right? Or a malign talk, Gossiping always implies that you're saying bad things about people, and in any case, nothing positive, nothing of value, no? And so to me, that change in the meaning of gossip is reflective of a whole transformation that is taking place, because the witch hunt were not an isolated persecution. Right? They came accompanied by a whole set of laws, legislations, right, that basically penalize, for instance, any form of contraception, and increase the penalty for every interference, with the process of procreation, making it a capital punishment, and with all kinds of legislation and reforms of everyday life. In England, for instance, more and more, it was looked down upon for women to sit in front of the house, as they used to do in all throughout Europe. When you finish your work or when you work, you go and sit in front of the house and you talk with other women across the street. So any moment of female friendship and female cooperation, it's now come under attack. And the only legitimate relation the women can have is either to a master or to a husband, which is often the same thing, and to a husband, and even a relation with the relatives begin to be looked down upon. Right? So the question of gossip, I think, is very important, and has opened up also another chapter of cruelty, another chapter of barbarity, because women who were seen as too talkative, too rebellious, and women also who were involved in struggles like against enclosure would be punished by being muzzled, right? A whole frame, a metal frame, the same kind of metal frame that was used for slaves. I don't know if you have seen it. It's metal or leather would be put on their head, and it would have a tongue, and the tongue would go into their mouth, and the tongue would have a spike. And if the woman tried to talk, the spike would lacerate the tongue. And in this way, muzzled this way, they were often paraded, like a dog on a leash. They would be paraded through the village or through the community to be an example to other women. And this is the period in which, in the sermons of the priest, the minister, you have a lot of harangues against women's tongue. Women's tongue is again, there's something, of the devaluation, expressive of the devaluation of women as a social subject, and devaluation of solidarity among women, friendship, and knowledges. The knowledges that women pass down in the community about procreation, herbs, healing practices, contraception. All these now begins to be demonized, criminalized, devalued, and made, an object of suspicion.
Silvia Federici, and she's speaking right there about the past. But lest we forget, Roe v. Wade is an example of women's freedom, collective reproductive freedom, is under the greatest challenge perhaps has been since it came into existence. This Supreme Court is going to be hearing cases coming right up, and it's this Supreme Court. This is by no means an old story, the violence against women. And nationwide access to abortion is more vulnerable than it has been in decades. And state by state, in Ohio, for example, they're going to allow women who have abortions to be prosecuted for murder. It's exactly what she's talking about. From the 16th century till today in Ohio and elsewhere, depending on the outcome of some of these cases that this Supreme Court, it's so real, it's so fresh, and it's so frightening. And that's where this woman and her analysis is very helpful in centering and understanding the whys that it is happening. Why this war on women that's been going on, in my view, from the GOP for decades now. That's why, because of the threat women can pose to capitalism, to the accumulation of wealth. That women are interested in protecting a non-commodification of wealth. That wealth is it's not a commodity. It's a communal thing that we share. Just as Ramdas was talking yesterday about the sharing impulses of our hearts. Those are the very things that are most threatening to capitalism in what many see as its, late stage, back against the wall, to the death fight right now against women and against anything that sounds like cooperation. No. Competition is the only thing that's allowed. I'm hoping that this resonates with you, what Silvia Federici is talking about, and that you will support the station with your hard-earned money and call us at 1-800-439-5732, 1-800-439-KPFA, and online at kpfa.org. We have received nary a call toward our $600 match. Nada. Anything that you pledge is doubled by Susan in Santa Clara. You can look online at kpfa.org at all of the many thank you gifts, but even beyond thank you gifts, just the gift that the power that this station gives all of us, the power, those 59,000 watts, the power of our being 70 years old, because they would never give us this place on the dial if we were applying today. It wouldn't happen. So it is a blessing that we started so early that FM radio was, nobody used FM radio. So sure, give these people, what do we care? Let them play around in FM. Nobody will ever listen to them. Well, guess what? FM is what is listened to. And of course, now we've got the internet, and we're there, thank heavens. 1-800-439-5732 and kpfa.org, all over the world, where these things continue to happen in the developing economies of Africa, etc. She says it is important to revisit the witch trials to understand some of what is taking place today, including the continuance of witch hunting in places like Ghana, Kenya, Mozambique, as well as Nepal and other countries. In the past 30 years, the deaths of tens of thousands of women, 23,000 from 1991 to 2001 alone. Scholars and activists, and to remind people of the centrality of women's rights to all of these things. It's so easily brushed aside, isn't it? Especially in this country. Oh well, women are still not fully represented in Congress, for example, much less on the Supreme Court, where these vital decisions are going to be made. Or anywhere else in the quote-unquote power. There is a different kind of power, however, that is still very prevalent and very necessary. And that's the kind of power that Silvia Federici talks about and encourages and warns against the threats thereto. 1-800-439-5732, and we do have still the $600 on the line from Susan in Santa Clara. We have to make the $600 match, boys and girls. So the event, the Silvia Federici event on a CD is yours for a $75 donation, which is $5 a month. The book she's talking about, Witches, Witch Hunting, and Women, is slender volume, but as that woman said, it really packs a punch. $80 to KPFA, or $8 a month. And her longer treatise on this same topic is Caliban and the Witch. That's an earlier book, Women, the Body, and Primitive Accumulation. That book is yours for a $150 donation, or $15 a month. Both of these books, very pertinent, and the CD are yours for a $250 donation. And if two folks would subscribe at that point, we would have $500 toward our $600 match from Susan in Santa Clara. We have just a few minutes more of Silvia to hear, and I want to squeeze that one in before we go, and I'll be back to remind you of the phone number, 1-800-439-5732. Here's Silvia Federici.
All these legislation are being introduced that are protecting fetuses, not protecting children. They are protecting the fetuses. So fetuses are now persons. They have a lot of rights. In some trial, they are given lawyers. Once they are born, then there is no interest, absolutely, in their well-being, which indicates that the point, of course, is not the protection of life. The point, of course, is to make it very difficult for the population of women who are not really seen fit to have children. You know, this is part of the long struggle in the United States that the government has waged against the black population. And so this clearly is a form of war against women. But more broadly, the transformation, restructuring of the world economy that has taken place over the last 4 decades at least, is making it more and more difficult for women to survive, and has created such condition that has put women really at the center of a lot of violence. And again, not all women, we know the black women, trans women, and so on, are especially targeted. But there's been a growth of violence against all. And I want to touch briefly and conclude, but briefly, as some of the sources of the violence. In Latin America, for instance, a lot of the violence have to do with the fact that women are really leading the struggle against land dispossession, against the extractivist companies. They are the ones who are really in the front line when an oil company or when a mining company is coming into their areas. You know, and as I was saying today in an interview, often coming into conflict even with the men in their community, because many of young men, you know, see an advantage in a mining company coming because it might bring some wages, and they don't have any power, they don't have, and the wage represents something. But actually, the women know that once you have mercury in the waters and mercury in the cropland, then there is no way. In one, maybe 10, 20 years, people have to leave. And they are the ones who have to deal with the water, with the cooking, with the etc. Similarly, and that's why you find that they are really the target. So many women's leaders of movements against extractivism, from Berta Cáceres, but many others in Colombia, have been killed, no? And also the places that women go to work now, more and more out in the street, out in the night, to be able to make something, because the land dispossession, the precarization of work, the collapse of the male wage, now more and more women, big increase in the number of women that migrate. No, women who come from Latin America take contraceptives because they know that many chances are that they might be raped, you know, on the journey, not to mention what has been happening more. And, you know, also because of struggling for more autonomy, less dependence of men. They're the target of many individual men. The rise of violence is also a way of silencing and responding to women's struggle for self-determination. This is also extremely important.
Silvia Federici, tying things together. Here is a review in, redpepper.org, which is a UK review site. Federici's attempt to draw together the work of feminists and activists from different parts of the world and place them in historical context is brave, thought-provoking, and timely. Federici's writing is lucid and her fury palpable. It is just a shame that there is a need for books like these at all. We are offering you 2 of her books on this topic of women's power and the war on women, namely the book that she was here in town talking about, the witch hunting And women, that's yours for $80 to KPFA, or $8 a month. Caliban and the Witch, Women, the Body, and Primitive Accumulation. That book is yours for a $150 donation to KPFA, or $15 a month. The KPFA event we've been listening to is yours on CD for a $75 donation, and that's $5 a month. And all three of them together, the two books and the event, for a $250 donation to KPFA. 1-800-439-5732. 1-800-439-KPFA. Susan in Santa Clara has $600 on the line here, and so far it looks like we could use another $360 to make that $600. Whatever you can afford is doubled. When you go to kpfa.org, you can search there for a thank you gift that you would like, or that someone you know would like. You can donate anything, and it's doubled. And when you call 1-800-439-5732, 1-800-439-KPFA, or let's see, online at kpfa.org, I just said. Susan in San Francisco, many blessings to you. Thank you so much. Anonymous in San Francisco, thank you for your donation. Art in Healdsburg, amen. Thank you. You're going to enjoy that book. Anonymous in San Francisco, thank you for your call. And Robert in Pleasant Hill, many blessings to you. And Kirsten in Palo Alto, thank you so much for your donation. 1-800-439-5732. I can't say more and anything more important than the phone number, 1-800-HEY-KPFA. And online, of course, at kpfa.org. We hope to make that match. We've got another couple seconds. Let me just add my math is, of course, the best. Okay, now it's down to 300. That's good. 1-800-439-5732. A minute to go at 510. I beg your pardon. 1-800-4. I'm going to the olden days. Whatever works. The memory brings up something that was a solution in the past. 1-800-439-5732 and kpfa.org. We also always would welcome you in our phone room. We always need more folks in the phone room because there are always people that are trying to call us and help us out with a donation. 1-800-439-5732. 1-800-439-KPFA and online at kpfa.org. Workers of the world, unite.
My name is Richard Wolf. Whatever else you think about them, these are times of big change. And at a time of big change, nothing could be more important than having some genuinely independent public media sources like KPFA. These are unbelievably important institutions at this particular time. So if you've never contributed before, now is the time to do it.
Donate today at 1-800-439-5732 or online at kpfa.org.